Hello everybody, I'm Brainy Diode, and I'm about to say something bold, something controversial, and something that you definitely won't expect to hear from me if you saw my video summing up everything I played in 2020. The Hitman World of Assassination Trilogy, a soft reboot of the Hitman series consisting of 2016's Hitman, 2018's Hitman 2, and 2021's Hitman 3, is good. I know, shocking. But today, I'd like to sum up the goodness of Hitman in the form of a ranked list. Why? Because I like ranked lists, and it's my video and you can't stop me. So yeah, it's time to rank every single mission in the Hitman World of Assassination trilogy. All 22 of them. Intros are hard, so here we freaking go. Future Brainy Diode from the editor's chair here. I noticed a couple quick things during editing that I forgot to include in the intro. First of all, this video obviously contains spoilers for both story and location spoilers for the entire World of Assassination trilogy, so if you want to go into any of it blind, then turn off this video now. Also, I muted audio, I muted NPC dialogue in my settings while recording gameplay for this video, just so that it wouldn't conflict too much with my voice. So if the soundscapes of any levels feel a bit emptier than they should, they probably are. Also, I discovered that for some reason the echoes of NPC dialogue and some dialogue that comes through like loudspeakers and such isn't actually muted when you mute NPC dialogue, so if you hear any of that in the background, that's what that's about. Anyway, now actually back to Me to the Past and on with the video. In 22nd place, we're starting off with Hitman 2016's second tutorial, The Final Test, which sees Agent 47 traverse a recreation of ICA director Eric Soder's most legendary mission and his, well, final test before officially becoming an ICA assassin. Soders has intentionally made the test far more difficult than usual in an attempt to bar 47 from entering the ICA, but this fairly interesting setup is really let down by the actual mission itself, which, on your first playthrough at least, will see Diana Burnwood walk you step by dull step through the exact method Soders used to kill his target. This is, in essence, an introduction to the opportunity system, which would come to be known as mission stories in the second and third games, which are specific sequences in each mission that the developers have included to lead you to an easy opportunity to kill your target, usually in some spectacular way. Mission stories can be quite funny, such as one in the first game, Sapienza, where you trick your target into playing golf with an explosive ball, or in a later mission in the second game that sees you participate in a vote that determines the course of global politics, and subsequently push your target into an Iron Maiden device. But I feel that they fundamentally undermine the forced creativity and chaos that are some of the series' greatest strengths. The spectacles at the end of mission stories can always be found without the game holding your hand by paying close attention to NPC dialogue and exploring the level on your own, and in my opinion are much more satisfying to pull off that way than by having the game explicitly guide you through every step. Of course, on subsequent playthroughs of this mission, you aren't forced down such a strict path, but even then, you're met with a level that is quite small compared to most in the series and feels drab and lifeless to boot. Worst of all is how the mission story system has already been introduced in all but name back in the first tutorial, making the final test feel completely redundant. The best thing I can say about this mission is that it gets the worst the series has to offer out of the way early, and it's all up from here. The 7th and penultimate mission of the first game, Freedom Fighters, comes in 21st place, and sees Agent 47 infiltrate a remote farm in Colorado that has been repurposed into a training camp for the militia whose leader has been manipulating the ICA throughout the course of the game, with the goal of taking out several of the militia's top members and finding as much information as you can on its leader. The stakes are much higher than they have been throughout the rest of the game, but they've been raised in ways that make the mission feel much more aggravating than intense. First of all, there are 4 targets in this mission, the second most in any mission in the entire trilogy. Secondly, the map is one of the most flat and open in the entire trilogy, which not only makes it notably less interesting to navigate, but also results in it being remarkably difficult to isolate anyone long enough to kill them or disguise yourself as them, which is again compounded by the guards clumping together all the time. And even when you do manage to take out all the targets, there's only one exit to the mission, which will require even more sneaking and illegal activity to unlock. A casual playthrough will almost definitely see you spend more time on this mission than on any other in the trilogy, which is a bit of a problem when not only is it not very fun to navigate, as I said earlier, but it frankly isn't very pleasant to look at either. The second half of the first game is, in my opinion, one of the lowest points of the trilogy, and this is definitely a significant contributor. In 20th place, Untouchable, the 6th mission of the third game and the final mission of the entire trilogy, sees 47 wake up after being poisoned by Burnwood to find himself on a ghost train in the Romanian portion of the Carpathian Mountains that has been taken over by Providence, and he must covertly make his way to the front of the train where Providence's leader, Arthur Edwards, awaits. This ditches the freeform and creativity-driven nature of the rest of the trilogy and becomes a much more stereotypical, much more linear stealth gauntlet. Also, unlike literally every single other mission in the trilogy, you are rewarded for killing non-targets here rather than punished. That all leaves this mission feeling very un-Hitman. And while it's not necessarily bad, it lacks most of what I expect and want out of the series. What gives it an edge over the 2 missions I've already discussed, however, is that at the end of the mission, you are given the option to kill Edwards or inject him with the same serum Providence used to wipe 47's memory. And you do so immediately after Edwards says, "At least I die knowing who I am." Unfortunately, a single QTE and a nice cutscene or 2 do not a good level make, and that leaves the trilogy going out not with a bang, but with a whimper. We're jumping straight from the last mission of the trilogy to the first, with 19th place going to the first game's first tutorial mission, Freeform Training. Technically there's another mission before this, but it takes place on the same map as this one and is even more handholdy than the final test, so I'm not going to count it. I'm not sure why exactly I enjoy this level more than the final test. It might be the endearing half-finished plywood aesthetic. It might be the slightly more varied exfiltration methods. It might be the crowd on the fake cruise ship's main deck, making the map feel notably livelier. Or it may even be that the game forcing you to revisit it frees you from the constraints of the mission story, and encourages you to do multiple playthroughs of subsequent levels as well. Whatever the reason, I definitely get more fun out of this map than the previous ones, despite its simplicity compared to most missions. In 18th place, A Gilded Cage, the 5th mission of the first game, sees you take out 2 soon-to-be military coup leaders in Marrakesh, Morocco. One of these leaders has turned an abandoned schoolhouse into a military training facility, while the other hides out in an embassy. As you might imagine, both of these areas are extremely heavily guarded, and they therefore both feel extremely disconnected from the rest of the mission. They're also very disconnected from each other, except for a single secret passageway leading between the two. So this map ends up feeling like two much smaller levels with a bunch of fluff sitting in between. Don't get me wrong, the ride outside the embassy and the marketplace further into the city are fun to explore and seem well designed at first glance, but there's so little point to anything there is to do there that it almost feels like a waste of space. What makes this even worse is that there's a certain level in the second game that does a similar setup to this significantly better, but we won't be getting to that one for a long time. Receiving the dishonor of being the lowest ranked mission in the second game is its third mission, taking 17th place. The Three-Headed Serpent sees 47 travel to Santa Fortuna, Colombia to bring down a drug cartel that is aiding the militia from back in Colorado. This may very well be the largest map in the entire trilogy, but unfortunately that makes it just as susceptible to the mistakes of Marrakesh, in that it feels like a collection of smaller levels with a bunch of padding in between. What alleviates this feeling just a little bit to give it a slight edge over Marrakesh is a few mission stories that require you to do things outside of the smaller areas. The fact that these areas are much less frustrating to get into than in Marrakesh, and the addition of a third target who wanders between these areas and through certain easier to reach bits of the aforementioned padding. Although your best bet for eliminating her is still probably to sneak into yet another little area. Ultimately, this mission shows that the team did learn some lessons from the mistakes of Marrakesh, but that bigger really does not equal better when it comes to this series. In 16th place is Hitman 2's tutorial level, Nightcall, in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. Despite on the surface being just as simplistic as the two tutorial levels from the first game that I've already talked about, one thing that Nightcall does leagues better than those two is atmosphere. The mission sees you infiltrate a lone house standing on a massive, wide-open beach in the middle of the night in search of information on the militia. The house is empty with the exception of the corpses of two torture victims in the garage. There's a TV still on right smack in the middle of the house, and despite having played through this level enough times to know that I'm not in any danger, I have to turn it off every time because it always makes me feel like I'm about to be discovered. The information that you're looking for is in a computer protected by a password dongle, which is hidden in a secret safe room full of guns, grenades, and shurikens. This, of course, leads up to a militia officer and an entourage of armed guards arriving home just as you finish gathering the intel, forcing you to immediately hide and figure out how to take out your new target from an area you're already trespassing in. It caps off with a run through the guards now combing the beach you started on, and a fun little set piece requiring you to blow up a car to distract the guards away from your escape boat. Like I said, it's simplistic and doesn't have nearly as much to offer as most of the larger maps in the series, but it does an absolutely fantastic job of setting up the adventure that lies ahead of it. Speaking of the adventure that lies ahead, in 15th place is the 5th mission of the second game, Another Life, set in the suburban neighborhood of Whittleton Creek, Vermont. This mission sees you target a required KGB spy master and former second-in-command of the secret organization Providence, as well as search for any information he may have on the identity of the current second-in-command. This map is, in a lot of ways, Colorado, but done better, which is both a blessing and a curse. On the plus side, there are only 2 targets this time instead of 4, there are several houses to explore this time instead of just one, which makes the level a bit more fun to explore, and it's just flat out more pleasant to look at. Also, there's a muffin vendor, so you can collect muffins and throw them at people, which is always a fun time. However, there is a rather dull MacGuffin hunt you have to play through every time you visit the map. It's not that bad since you'll probably do most of it naturally while setting up your assassinations, but chances are high that you'll have to go out of your way at least once. The whole several houses bit is also brought down by the fact that you can't actually enter most of the houses, and those you can enter tend to be the same floor plan over and over. A garden party in the middle of the map livens it up a little, but there's very little reason to actually go there, so it suffers a similar fate to the crowds in Marrakesh. Once the novelty of causing chaos in the suburbs wears off, you're left with a mission that's certainly not terrible by any means, but feels a lot smaller than it looks and is far from the most impressive work the team has done. In 14th place, the first game's 8th and final mission, Cetus in Versus, sees 47 travel to an elite hospital in Hokkaido, Japan, to put an end to his faux rivalry with ICA director Ark Society throughout the game, as Society himself and his lawyer become your targets. I'll be frank, this map has one of my favorite visual designs in the entire series, and it also boasts an interesting and unique take on the disguise system, with some of the doors in the hospital only unlocking if you're wearing a specific set of clothing. Indeed, the half of the map dedicated to Soder's lawyer is a well-designed and well-put-together, if slightly bland Hitman level, but unfortunately I can't really say the same for the portion of the map dedicated to Soder's. See, Soder's is undergoing preparations for heart surgery, which means that, unlike literally every other target in the entire trilogy, he will stay in one place for the entire duration of the mission. This does also apply to the target in Untouchable, but I've already discussed why that's far from being a traditional Hitman level. The operating theater is surrounded by heavily armed bodyguards, making it quite difficult to get inside, and it also has a pair of windowed observation decks, meaning that you will be constantly watched once you are inside. Instead of coming off as the grand final challenge I'm sure the developers intended, this feels, to me at least, more like the game railroading me into using one of a small handful of predetermined opportunities. Like I said while discussing the final test, I feel like this design philosophy removes a lot of room for the experimentation and creativity that really makes this series shine. Though, of course, this mission's railroading isn't nearly as bad as the final tests, and there's still plenty more standard Hitman fun to be found in the other half of the level, so I'll take Cetus and Versus over the final test any day of the week. 13th place also goes to a mission from the first game, and will be the last we'll see of Hitman 1 for quite a while. The game's 5th mission, Club 27, sees 47 travel to an exclusive hotel in Bangkok, Thailand, on the trail of a young rock star who was recently acquitted for a murder he definitely committed. Rhyme unintentional. There's nothing particularly wrong with this mission, but there's also nothing particularly memorable about it either, aside from a single mission story that lets you make 47 play the drums. This is also the only mission in the entire trilogy that I find myself frequently forgetting about completely, only reminded that it exists by the thought, surely you don't go straight from Marrakesh to Colorado, right? Which is a shame, really, because as you can probably tell from the disproportionate representation of the first game on the list so far, the first game was really hurting for truly good missions, and this is certainly one of the better ones. Although there are 2 missions from the first game that outshine it quite a bit. Under the right circumstances, you can hear an NPC say, "This generation is just too sensible," which is a version of "Millennials ruin everything" I certainly haven't heard before, so there's that, I guess. As you can tell, I'm already out of things to say about this mission, so let's move on, shall we? Bringing the lower half of the list to a close is the first mission of the third game, On Top of the World in Dubai. It opens with a strictly scripted opening sequence, a rarity for the series, which sees 47 climbing the exterior of the tallest building in the world, sneaking through the vents, and finally emerging in the middle of a party celebrating the building's opening. Of course, among the attendees of this party are your 2 targets, 2 of the 3 co-leaders of Providence. From here, the level opens up into a much more traditional Hitman mission that, much like Club 27, is solidly designed but does not have any especially noteworthy attributes, either good or bad. Probably the worst thing I could say about it is that some of the staff-only areas on the lower floors can be rather confusing to navigate, but since you'll typically only need to go there for disguises and equipment, having a solid mental map of them isn't nearly as important as it is for the areas your targets occupy. This level is elevated above Club 27 just slightly by how grandiose the visual design is in the public areas of the party and in the penthouse at the very top of the map, a particularly cool mission story that sees you hack into the tower's security to allow your new partner in crime to monologue to the targets over video call, and some fun and interesting exfiltration methods. All in all, a solid introduction to the final game of the trilogy, but one that will be overshadowed by nearly all of the game's following missions. In 11th place is the 6th mission of the second game, the Ark Society. 47 and his recently expanded crew have tracked the second-in-command of Providence to the meeting of the titular Ark Society, a shadowy cabal of super-rich apocalypse preppers. 47 lands on the remote island on which the meeting is being held with the intent to kidnap him, but finds that the Society's two chairwomen each have the ability to kill the Providence operative with the press of a button, so he has to take them both out before he will be able to extract him safely. This mission introduces the concept of an NPC that must not be eliminated, a concept that would only be carried over to one future mission. But nothing interesting is done with the idea here, since you are by far the biggest danger to him. What this mission does nail, though, is, just like Nightcall, atmosphere. The level is isolated in a dark and stormy sea, and is set in a refurbished medieval European castle, with a whole bunch of modern and even slightly futuristic elements added on top. The castle is full of shortcuts, secret passages, and hidden nooks and crannies that make it interesting to explore, and the nature of the event playing out around you gives you some really interesting opportunities to get close to your target, such as taking part in a vote to decide the direction of global politics, or disguising yourself as a dead body in a coffin. The only downsides are the aforementioned failure to pay off the potential of a target you must protect, and how intimidating navigating the castle can be for the first time. I think it's a real testament to the strength of this series' level design that such a strong showing can only make it to around the halfway point of the list. Third game's 5th mission, The Farewell. With 47's handler Diana Burnwood now a strong candidate to become the leader of Providence, giving her the chance to dismantle the organization from the inside, all that stands in her way are her two rivals for the position. Luckily, all three of them are attending a party at a winery in Mendoza, Argentina, giving 47 the perfect chance to eliminate the competition. It's awfully convenient that this mission came in just ahead of the Ark Society, as this is the only other mission in the trilogy with a target you cannot eliminate. But the Farewell, in my opinion, executes the concept much better. First of all, you have a much closer connection to this target. It's Diana herself, the woman who has been a guiding companion for about 2.5 games at this point. Secondly, one of the targets you are meant to eliminate is practically glued to Diana at the hip, meaning that eliminating that target without figuring out how to separate the two of them becomes a much riskier move. And finally, there's a certain event you can trigger that will cause the other target to kill Diana himself if you don't move fast enough, which certainly ups the stakes if you don't keep an eye on her. Unfortunately, this is hampered a bit by the fact that you're given far more time to reach her after triggering this event than you should ever realistically need, but it's nice to see one of the trilogy's more unique ideas return after a bit more polish nonetheless. As for the level itself, it's surprisingly cohesive despite how many disparate areas there are, but these disparate areas tend to be a bit too small for my liking for the most part, and navigating them just isn't as interesting to me as it is in many of the series' other maps. In 9th place is the second game's 7th mission, The Golden Handshake, set in New York City. To tell the truth, when I started this project, I fully expected this mission to be in the top 5 or maybe even the top 3, so I'm a bit surprised that this is where it wound up. But 9th place out of 22 is nothing to scoff at, especially in a series as well put together as this one. This mission has a very simple but very effective setup. You enter a bank through the main entrance on the ground floor. Your target is on the 4th floor. Get to her. As you ascend through the building, you have to contend with gradually tightening security as you gradually uncover more and more of the corruption going on behind the scenes in the bank. Writing on Games puts it best, this mission is an absolute masterclass on level design as storytelling. Unfortunately, this is somewhat undermined by having completion of one of the simplest mission stories in the level grant you unrestricted access to the majority of the map. You'll still have to do a little bit of sneaking to get to the target, but it massively reduces that mission's difficulty and leaves it feeling much less satisfying in my opinion. Another goal of this mission is to collect data on the leaders of Providence, which you can go about in one of two ways. Either get the hard drives your target and 2 NPCs are carrying, which will require you to kill them or knock them out, or, my personal preferred option, do a little bank heist. Because when you're playing a Hitman mission set in a bank, how could you possibly resist sneaking into that big old vault in the basement? Opening up the massive vault door and casually strolling inside after knocking out all the guards with some sedatives and the air conditioning is oh so satisfying. Even if escaping after your heist is much easier than it probably should be, I still have a lot of fun with this mission, even if my opinion of it has dropped recently. In 8th place is the second mission of the third game, Death in the Family, set in Dartmoor, England. 47 travels to a grand manor on the English countryside to take out the third co-leader of Providence, who has faked her death and subsequently surprised her family by overseeing the preparations of her own funeral, only to discover that her son actually has died, prompting her to hire a private investigator to discover the cause of his death. With that rather complicated setup out of the way, you may already be piecing together where this is going. Indeed, what makes this level really shine is, in my opinion, the best mission story in the entire trilogy. Now, I know that I've been a bit harsh on mission stories thus far in the video, but this one really demonstrates the potential they had to impose less of a restriction on the player's creativity. The mission allows 47 to take the place of the PI and investigate for clues throughout the mansion, culminating in a decision you must make when meeting with your target to explain your findings. Depending on whether you lie or tell the truth about the murderer's identity, you can isolate your target in the perfect place to kill her, indirectly cause the real murderer to do your work for you, or even drive the target to kill herself. You can also request the file that acts as your secondary objective as payment for your investigation, checking both boxes at once. Of course, there's plenty of fun to be had here even if you don't take that route. The level design is incredibly tight by this point in the series, and it's all topped off by a simple but fun puzzle to get the file if you don't take it directly from the target, although the combination you're looking for is the same in every playthrough, so you can skip it on subsequent playthroughs with good enough memory or a note stashed somewhere. But like I said, the real joy of this mission is seeing what mission stories could have been. Moving from 8th place to 7th also moves us from Hitman 3's second mission to its third, Apex Predator. At this point, 47 himself has become the ICA's #1 target, and a number of his fellow assassins have cornered him in a nightclub just outside of Berlin, Germany, and his only way to escape is to send a message that he really is the best at what he does. This mission has, in my opinion, the coolest premise in the entire trilogy, and if it had been executed to its full potential, this easily would have made it to the top 5, probably even the top 3. There are a whopping 10 targets in this mission, more than double the second largest number of targets in a single map, but you only need to kill 5 of them. This could have easily become the next Colorado, but the overwhelming number of targets is counterbalanced by an environment that is both much nicer to look at and much more interesting to explore, as well as it not being nearly impossible to get a disguise. On your first playthrough, and potentially subsequent playthroughs as long as you choose the same starting location as the first playthrough, your targets aren't pointed out to you as they usually are, and you instead have to sneak around first and figure out who is out of place. Each time you identify an ICA assassin, 47 says their name aloud to himself, adding to the tragedy of him being forced to kill his former comrades. After killing the first, you steal their earpiece and get to listen to the others become increasingly panicked as they realize they're being picked off. Unfortunately, this mission's ultimate betrayal of its concept is that the assassins don't really act any different from typical enforcer NPCs. There are no clever traps laid for you, and they can't pick you out of a crowd nearly as easily as you can them. I know 47 is supposed to be the best at what he does, but frankly, that really removes a lot of the tension that comes with a duel between assassins. If they had nailed the premise, this certainly would have been the masterpiece level that I felt the third game was lacking. As it stands, it's just pretty good, and you know, I can't be too harsh on it for that. In 6th place is the 8th and final mission of the second game, The Last Resort, which takes place at a resort on Haven Island in the Maldives. Honestly, I'm not sure I have much to say about this one. It's just a really well-designed level. The visuals are really nice to look at, there's a nice variety of locations to explore without any feeling excessively large or disappointingly small. Despite the lack of verticality, the island's plant life and the space between NPCs helps alleviate the line-of-sight issues Colorado faced. There's a secret basement underneath the mansion that you might not even stumble across for multiple playthroughs that gives you an opportunity to get all 3 targets in one place without automatically making that the best option. My only problem with the mission is that, for some reason, I find one of the targets excessively difficult to isolate, which usually leads me to killing him in the middle of a crowd and then hiding until things calm down. Still, that's just a small bruise on what is otherwise a phenomenal example of level design. Kicking off the top 5 is the first game's third mission and the first full map of the trilogy, The Showstopper, in Paris, France. Oh boy, what a way to start. I'll link the Writing on Games video about the first Hitman game in the description because he does so much better a job explaining this than I ever could. Sorry, Hamish, I know you're not satisfied with that video anymore, but I still really like it. But this map does such a fantastic job of naturally guiding the player through the mansion without forcing you to do anything or even appearing to hold your hand, that it's not unthinkable that with a little bit more guidance as to the game's controls, this could have functioned as a tutorial all on its own. It's just a really coherent, polished puzzle box that's chock full of fun interactions without feeling bloated. The visual design is also really nice, and the map does a fantastic job of visually distinguishing the different areas, from the gardens, to the parking lots, to the bar, to the fashion show catwalk, to the mansion's basement and attic, that it's honestly pretty difficult to get lost here. The only problem I have with the mission is that it has the most egregious example of a skeleton key costume, or an outfit that you go just about anywhere fairly easily in the entire series. But honestly, for a mission designed to ease players into a series that, let's be frank, can be pretty daunting to newcomers, I think something like that is pretty easily forgivable. It would have gotten obnoxious if we saw too many of these, but by the second and third games, they're very few and far between, so I'm just glad that this wasn't emblematic of a problem that would affect the entire series. Like I said, this is a really phenomenal opening level that's still one of the best the series has to offer. In fourth place is the third game's crown jewel, its fourth mission, End of an Era. Despite 47's triumph in Germany, the ICA is still hot on his heels, so he and his one remaining companion, Olivia Hall, decide to bring the entire organization down by leaking its existence to the general public. To do so, they'll need to upload the data stored by the organization's central computer, but, of course, the only way for 47 and Olivia to gain access to the computer is by killing both the people who hold the key to its biometric lock in quick succession. Apparently, a lot of people were quite disappointed by this mission, but as you can already tell, I clearly don't fall into that camp. I think the main point of disappointment was that the trailers mostly showed off the beautiful, rain-drenched, neon-lit streets of the city, while the bulk of the mission actually takes place in a rundown apartment complex hosting some highly illegal psychological experiments, and the ultra-sterile-feeling ICA facility hidden beneath a local restaurant. While I agree that more time spent on the street would have been nice, I wouldn't at all call it wasted space, since you'll still almost definitely need to take some time there to figure out how to get into the ICA facility. While I think that the design of the apartment complex is a little weak and barely holds this mission back from the true masterpiece status of the top 3, there are still some ways for what you do in the apartment to affect what goes on in the ICA facility, which helps prevent this from feeling like two unrelated maps mashed together. The ICA facility, on the other hand, is a really solid piece of level design, feeling almost like an inverted version of the New York Bank, with security getting heavier and harder to get past the further you delve underground. Once you finally eliminate your targets and reach the computer on the facility's lowest floor, the level finishes off with a high-tension escape sequence, with the building setting on fire and every guard able to see through your disguises near instantly. It doesn't feel very Hitman, but it is really exciting, and forgivably short, and best of all, you can skip it on subsequent playthroughs if you want. It's also, I think, emblematic of the third game's dedication to adding new and novel gameplay approaches to the trilogy, to help keep the series from getting too formulaic, and taking risks is something I can really respect. In third place is the fourth mission of the second game, Chasing a Ghost, set in Mumbai, India. This is the mission that, way back near the beginning of the list, I mentioned could have easily been the second game's Marrakesh if it hadn't been handled as well as it was. It's got a very similar setup, with two targets pretty much exclusively hanging out in isolated locales, this time an abandoned train yard and an under-construction skyscraper turned movie set, with a mess of crowded streets in between. To begin with, the spaces the targets occupy are bigger and more intricate this time, giving you a lot more to work with in terms of places to hide or ways to make your kills look accidental. One of them is also bolstered by a fan-favorite mission story that sees you crossing paths with a really bad assassin with his eyes on one of your targets, who you can covertly help to pull off the kill for you. But what really elevates this level over the first game's equivalent is how the crowd is used. Namely, that it hides a third target whose appearance you don't know at the start of the mission. To figure out who exactly you're aiming for, you'll need to sneak into a gang hideout near the center of the map to find a photo of your target, then suss him out from the crowd, and finally figure out how to isolate him from that crowd to eliminate him in secret. It's the kind of puzzle that might get old if you played it an excessive number of times, but feels really fresh and novel when it's introduced. As satisfying as the Hitman formula can be, there is always something to be said for the greatness that can be achieved when you break away from that formula. Let's be honest, if you've played this trilogy, you already knew what the top two missions were going to be before you even clicked on the video. The only question is, which is which? Well, the moment of truth has finally arrived. In second place is World of Tomorrow, set in Sapienza, Italy, the fourth mission of the first game. I know a lot of people were expecting this to take the first place slot, but allow me to explain. Yes, the mansion is fantastic. Yes, the secret underground lab is fantastic. Yes, the visual design is absolutely gorgeous. Yes, blowing up your target with an exploding golf ball is comedy gold. Yes, the level is expansive and has a lot of places to explore without feeling overwhelming. But, and this is going to be an incredibly controversial but, was the town really necessary? I know, so many people love the town specifically because it's not. It adds to the world building and sense of immersion to not have the entire level solely devoted to what 47 is doing, but aside from some potential vantage points for a sniper rifle, or a mission story or two involving the little chapel on the beach or the barber shop, what do you really get out of the town in terms of exploration or equipment that you can't also get from the mansion? For most of the top half of this list, I've been praising the map design for being incredibly tight, but I just don't feel like I can say that for a mission where half the map doesn't really feel like it needed to be there. Now, I know that for a second place mission, I'm spending a lot more time criticizing it rather than praising it, but honestly, what else can I say about this mission that hasn't already been said? The two best levels in this trilogy are so incredibly phenomenal that picking a favorite between the two really is going to come down to details that are, on the whole, pretty insignificant. A lot of people really love the town, so I can't fault the developers for including it, but it just doesn't work for me personally, which is why Sapienza is hanging out in second place rather than first. And speaking of first place, there's only one mission left it could be, the second mission of the second game, the finish line in Miami, Florida. Man, how thematically appropriate would a second place finish for this mission have been, especially since the target involved in the car race this map is built around will come in second place if you don't screw with the race somehow. This mission plays with time in a way very few Hitman levels do, by ending the race around 20 minutes after you gain control of 47, assuming you choose the default starting location. It can end earlier depending on which unlockable location you choose. Since one of your targets is driving one of the cars, that means your options for eliminating her change drastically over the course of the mission. You can screw with this yourself by dressing up in a certain disguise to end the race early, which is one of the only ways to get your target to win the race and take a drink of the victory champagne that you may have poisoned earlier. This level is also composed of two main areas, the spectator area for the aforementioned race, and a robotics lab belonging to the race's sponsor company. I usually count disparate areas like this as a negative, but this map pulls it off really well by positioning them very close together and having plenty of routes between them. You can also affect what goes on at one end of the level with what you do on the other, especially if you go for the famous double elimination strat of pushing one of your targets onto the racetrack just in time for your other target's car to crash into him and explode. And, of course, we can't ignore that you can disguise yourself as a flamingo mascot and dance for the crowd. Speaking of the crowd, they help create a really vibrant atmosphere to the whole mission, supplemented by the sounds of the race all around you, and the miniature museum set up on the ground floor of the tech lab. Also, the plaza in front of the tech lab and the scenery that the plaza looks out on are really pretty, and dang, this is just a really good level. It has to be the best in such a fantastic trilogy. Well, that's all I had to say on the matter. If you've played the Hitman World of Assassination trilogy yourself, hopefully you didn't find my ranking too objectionable, and if you haven't played it, maybe I gave you inspiration to give it a shot. I can easily recommend this series to any fan of the stealth genre, and plenty of people who aren't into stealth games will probably find plenty to love in this series as well. Heck, I wasn't a stealth fan before playing these games, and I love the heck out of them. One thing's for sure, I'll definitely be keeping an eager eye on what this studio does in the future. And of course, there's only one way to end a video like this. I will leave you to prepare. Good luck, 47.